my name is Jo. I am. I live in Bracknell. My connection with Wales is through Mark Griffiths. I'm married to Steve, and I have 3 boys, like Matt. Mine are a lot older now, so I've got one who's nearly 21, one who's 18, and then one who's nearly 16. So two at university and one doing GCSEs this year. Please pray for me. I've been involved in children's work for over 20 years. I started as a children's pastor for Mark when he was over in England in a church called Warfield Church, which was a Church of England, and have worked through various churches since then. Recently I've been at Kerith Community Church, which is a free church, so moved away from the Church of England into a free kind of environment. And loving it because you don't have PCC or PCC and church wardens to battle with. But anyway, I've loved being a children's pastor. So I am. My title is Bridging the Gap. What can the church do to help better retain our tweenagers? So I am talking about this word, which is transition. So I'm basically talking about tweens, and I'll explain what the definition of that is. But I'm talking about where we have a thriving children's ministry, and then there's a youth ministry, and we kind of have our year sixes. They're going to secondary school, they're moving from children's work to youth work, and we kind of like get them on that journey. We've been investing in them since they were babies, and we're kind of then handing them over to the youth department, and praying that they make it over to the other end safely. And what tends to happen is some of them kind of fall. Is that your experience?
My son at the moment.
Yeah. If I just explain what the word because we all go through transitions, don't we, in our life? So transitions are in between times, living in the already but the not yet, a move from the familiar to the unfamiliar, a move from the way things have been to the way they will be, a move from the old to the new. Transitions combine this weird blend of positive and negative, of helpful and painful, and they try your faith and stretch your soul. You might know of your own kind of situation where you're in a kind of like a transition. Last year I was personally in a transition while we were waiting for my husband to find a job. So he got made redundant, and we kind of thought he was in finance, so we thought he would find a job fairly quickly. It took 9 months to find a job, and I don't know if you've ever listened to the Lectio. Does anyone listen to the Lectio 365?
Yeah.
It was amazing because there was a time when she was talking about like transitions being like birth. You know, like you're carrying a baby, aren't you? And it's could be 9 months of this kind of like transition where you're going from, you know, especially if it's your first child, from, you know, no children to suddenly you're carrying this, and you know that you're going to be starting this family, but you've kind of got this in-between bit where you're carrying it. And it felt like that for my husband. I was like, is this really going to be 9 months before we come out of this kind of like, you know, spending the redundancy and watching the money go down and down and down, and is he ever going to get work again? And it was actually 9 months, but it was a very, very painful transition. But within that, I really learned a lot. So yeah, we're talking about transition of primary to secondary, transitioning these children from Sunday school to youth work. That's the transition. I did my dissertation on transition, and I had to reword it because at the time when I put my proposal in, transition meant year 6 to year 7. It didn't mean gender transition as it does now. And there's a name for this particular age group. So these are kind of 8 to 10-year-olds, which are called tweens. It sounds very an American word, and I don't really like the word, but it kind of sums up this kind of, they're in between childhood and adolescence. So this age group would be those who buy merchandise to look, dress and act like teenagers. So you might be living with a tween, and you know what I'm talking about. They have phones now. Like as much as we tried to resist, like with my own children, they weren't allowed their phone until they started secondary school.
Same.
But a lot of their friends were having them in year 5 and 6. They were on WhatsApp, even though you're not supposed to be on WhatsApp until you're 16. Yeah, wearing makeup, particularly the girls. You know, I saw some of Sam's friends and that, you know, that were in his class in year 5 and 6, and they looked like 15, 16-year-olds. So these are the children that they're outgrown children's ministry. We know them, don't we? They look bored, they're just like pushing back, they don't want to be there, but they're too young to go into youth, even though they really want to go to youth. And these are just some pictures that I found off the internet. So they're kind of, into their makeup. Is this familiar? And just dressing a lot older than they actually are. So my passion for this, and this is, as I said, this is why I signed up to do the Masters, because I wanted to do research in this. So I was working for Mark. It was my first job as a children's pastor. And he said, I really want to start a kids club. He'd just written his book on one generation from extinction, and so I think he'd done all his research on the kids clubs, and he was like, Joe, let's start this kids club. I was like, yeah, we're doing this. He was already in the schools. He was doing the stories that Matt was talking about this morning. He had literally every child. He can hold an assembly for an hour just telling a story, and everybody's just engaged. So he won the hearts of the children, he'd won the hearts of the heads, and he was like, we've got the schools. I think he was in 7 schools at the time. We made a flyer, we kind of handed them around all the schools. So this was Warfield Church. So this is a 17th century church that's in the middle of nowhere. It's a very, very Anglican. There were pews at the time, so we had to sort of move the pews out, and we kind of flyered all the schools, not really knowing who was going to show. We kind of got the team all pumped. We had our hoodies. We were all ready to go. And it was opening. It was November the 15th, so it was dark because it was 5 o'clock, and they had to go through a graveyard to get to the the door. We were like, we don't know who to expect. We don't know how many kids we're going to get, because it wasn't like we didn't have church suite or anywhere to like people to sign up. We were literally like, just come along. So we were, in my head, I was preparing for about 50. I thought, if we get 50, that'll be a win. We had nearly 200 rock up. It was amazing. Scary, but amazing. It was like, wow, this is incredible. And for a couple of months, that's what our numbers were. As I said earlier, my husband is finance, so he was the one that was doing all the numbers for us. And we had like paper registers, we had, their sheets and everything, and he was doing all the statistics because we wanted to know which schools the children went to and their ages, and we had a really good proportion of children from every age. So they were coming from reception all the way up to year 6, and I think we had like 30 pretty much in each group, and it was amazing. And then kind of after Christmas, we started to see kind of like the numbers start to drop, which we thought, that's probably, people just having a nose. Post-Christmas, they'll all come back. And then when we started analysing the statistics of who was actually leaving, it was the year 5 and 6s. So we're like, okay, what are we doing that isn't attracting them? We've kind of followed the kids club kind of guide, like Matt was talking about. So we had messy games, we had stories, we had Bibles, things, we had craft, we had football. They were free play, running around the graves outside in the dark, crazy things. No, I don't think we probably did do a risk assessment, but it was a bit mad, as you can imagine. But we were losing like the year 5 and 6s, and it was the first time for me, I think, I had this reality of like, wow, this is an age group that we're not kind of hitting. Why aren't we hitting it? So I started doing research on why that might be, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute. But that's where my interest started. Is okay, this is an age group where they perhaps don't like mixing with reception in year 1, and do they need something specific? So fast forward to leaving kind of Warfield, and my next post was in a church in Guildford called St Saviour's, and by that point I'd started my master's programme, so I knew that this was an age group that I really wanted to reach, and we had we had kids work on a Sunday. In the morning, at the morning service, and then in the evening we had a group which was just for year 5 and 6s, because we only ran youth at the evening service, so they wanted to provide provision for those that would have kind of younger siblings of youth. So we had like a year 5 and 6, or year 4, 5 and 6. And my first kind of my first day when I did the evening, there was like, I don't know, 20 lads, mainly boys. I think there was one girl, and they were all boys, and they were raucous. Because I was like, this is great, this is my sweet spot. I've learned about how to relate to year 5 and 6s. This is going to be great. They're going to love me, and I'm going to be, I'm going to, they're going to, think this is great. And they literally were just sat bored. One of them was the vicar's son, who made his opinion very vocal. And he goes, "This is boring. I'd come in with all the things to entertain them. I was like, it's going to be great." And they were just all looking at me going, "This is boring." I was like, "What do you mean it's boring?" And it's like, "You're just boring. This whole thing is just boring. Church is boring." I was like, "What do you mean church is boring? Like, we go to Urban Saints on a Friday and it's brilliant. This is just, why can't church be like Urban Saints?" I've never heard of Urban Saints. So I don't know if you've heard of Urban Saints or what was Crusaders. So I was like, "Urban Saints, what's that?" And they were describing it to me. And as they were describing it, they just changed completely to, they were enthusiastic, their faces were just beaming when they thought about it. So I was like, what is this Urban Saints thing? So that's what I did my dissertation on, was looking at this particular age group and what Urban Saints was able to offer that church couldn't. So I'm going to be sharing some of that as well. But yeah, hopping back to this whole kind of like tweenage years, and what research has been done. So this is not new. Like, it's not been in the last kind of like 10 years that we've suddenly realised that that our tweens, our years 5 and 6s, start thinking, "Oh, church isn't for me," and we lose them when they go over to youth. This has been happening since Peter Brearley did research in 2000, because he was employed to look at like church statistics when churches were really worried about that they were losing people, and the age group that they were losing was 8 and 10-year-olds. So this was back in 2000. So 57% of children who leave churches do so before their 10th birthday. So the key years are between 7 and 10, where children are deciding if church is for them or not. So at this time, I think there was a lot of money put into youth work, thinking, it's when they go over to youth that we lose them. But actually, what's happening is we lose them before they go over to youth, because they're already deciding that church is boring, it's not for me. So when they get to that point where they can make that decision themselves, and they're not being dragged along by parents that are just like, "Please come along, please come along, we'll go to the cinema later, please come to church." When they have that decision of like, "Actually, I can make my own choice and I'm not going to come," and you can't and you're not forcing them into it, that's when they'll. But actually what we need to be doing is more working with the youth in the children's ministry side of things, not just hoping that they go across to youth. So that was Peter Brearley's research. David Goodwin, sort of 12 years later, so he's Australian, but he did a whole kind of dissertation on this particular age group based on Brearley's work. And his research, which is from Australia, was as many as 50% of children raised in churches leave during the transition phase. And this was what caught my attention when I was at Warfield. 80% of churches do not plan for the transition of their children to youth. So I think they just hope that somehow they're going to go across and everything's going to be fine, and we kind of like close the door, say like bye, and let's be honest, with some of our year 6s, we can't wait to see the back of them and think, thank goodness they've gone, and it's now for the youth pastors to deal with. But 80% of churches do not plan for the transition of their children to youth. Do you guys have a transition plan? That would be my question.
I will now.
And if you don't, what could that look like? I'm going to share. Mark has actually gone over to. He's good friends with David Goodwin, so he brought over his book. So this was when I was working for him with the kids club. So suddenly it was like, okay, we need to have a plan. These years 5 and 6s aren't coming, so we need to ask them why, and then do something about that. So we were purposeful in how we looked after our year 5 and 6s. So this is what we did. So we started, I created this kind of like transition calendar. So this is for outreach, and the next one will be in a church kind of setting, but this was for our outreach group. I haven't put in here, we started making them junior leaders. So we invited them, so we had all these year 5 and 6s on our database, some that had come and stopped and some that were still there, and we said, okay, you know, they just said, it's just boring, you know, we don't want to just sit and do face painting, or even some of them didn't want to play football in the dark. You know, we actually want some responsibility. So we made them junior leaders, so as soon as they hit year 5, we did like a sort of training with them. We gave them junior leader t-shirts. So we had like an All-Stars, was the name of our kids club. So we had this All-Stars branding with t-shirts and stuff. And so we invited them along. They had a different colour to us. They were lime green and everybody else was blue, I think. And then we started doing year 6 social. So as soon as September hit, as soon as they were in year 6, we got a database together and we're like, right, we're doing these socials. So we do stuff like, we'd go bowling and then we'd walk from the bowling to McDonald's. We did kind of pool parties, so we hired a pool with inflatables. We did movie nights. The key thing was inviting the youth leaders along to that, so they had started building that relationship with the youth leaders. So we would run those from September to March. Then we had a junior leader boot camp at Kids Club, so we would give them training. And it wasn't even, it was more training that came from them. So we just have clip charts and so rather than it being like, right, this is what you need to do as a leader. You need to listen, you need to arrive on time, you need to be engaged with what's going on. We was like, right, what do you think makes a good leader? And get them kind of brainstorming and creating a list. And that almost like became a charter for them. We also had, so at Easter, this was when they then transitioned over. So we would have a year 6 graduation, so we would bring them all to the front, we'd pray for them, we'd invite them along to church. We also gave out transition packs to all our year 6 parents, so that was a form of outreach. So anybody on our database, we would post off a pack which had an It's Your Move book in it. It also had a letter saying, it's been great to have your year 6 come to All Stars. This is now our youth stuff that happens, and a flyer, come along to a youth event. To try and get them to come, you know, to stay move across from the kids club to then our youth group on the Friday, and then they would join the youth programme. So we had training events, we had junior leaders at the kids club, and then they would join the youth programme. And then in June, July, once they'd had their transition days at school, we would have like a party for them. So either this would be at a host house or we'd do it in the church, but we basically just celebrate them. Going off to sort of secondary school. So that was the transition calendar from an outreach. And this is what I've done now most recently, because I'm not actually in a position to start a kids club where I am. So this is just how we would do transition in our church. So again, the socials are just key, because with our year 6s, we're actually fortunate to split. So we have on a Sunday morning, we have 4 groups. So we have our 0 to 2s, we have our 3 to 4s, then we have year reception to year 4, and then we have years 5 and 6 as a group. But what we do in from September is we start year 6 socials with them. So it gets them excited, gets them really bonding with each other, because they come from different schools as well. So Sundays is always a bit awkward because it's trying to build friendships. So again, the youth leaders come along to that. I've also done house groups, pod groups, small groups with the year 6s as well, so midweek. That's quite tricky because I think it comes more from parents. They've obviously got SATs. So trying to find an after school evening when everyone's around is quite difficult. But where possible, we try and get them together as well to do sort of Bible study, because you will find that out of some of those groups, some of the children will actually be interested in they'll be hungry for something a bit more meaty than what they perhaps get on a Sunday morning with time constraints and stuff. And then again, it's marking their kind of time in year 6, so having a graduation, bringing them up to the front, getting the church to pray for them. Just, you know, it's such a key time. You know, they're transitioning from, you know, physically in their bodies, they're changing, they're also there's a lot of change going on. So it's just making the church aware and getting them to pray, and getting them buddied up with somebody that's older. We also get as well in our group some of those youth to come along and start being a part of the class that's happening on a Sunday, so that it's not just outside of church that they see them, but also in the group as well. So we'd have them like maybe buddy up, and if our youth have got their own meeting, we'll maybe get them to come along at the end, because they're great at like getting alongside them and doing, you know, games and stuff with them at the end, and just hanging out with them after the service. So building that friendship. And so they would join the youth programme either at Easter or at May. So they've got a good half a term where they're still in year 6, but they've transitioned on a Sunday into youth, so that when they move school in September, it's not another change that they're having to manage. So that's why we would always try and encourage to do the transition in either Easter or May. And then what I've been doing over the last few years, this is just as an aside, I'm really passionate about helping schools do transition work with their year 6s. So I don't know what it's like in Wales. In England, it used to be the council that would come in and run workshops with them, but now, because of funding, it's down to the teachers. So this is a really good way of getting into schools if you're not in schools, because we've found that schools are actually hungry for the church to go in and just do something. And so particularly with a workshop like this, it doesn't really come across as churchy. So I've got some examples here, but I've gone in and done year 6 workshop, so you can take some of this away with you. It's called a Bridging the Gap year 6 workshop. It's really good if you can take a year 13 or a year 11 with you. So I always do it at the end of June, so they've finished their exams. Hopefully they haven't gone on holiday and they're up for kind of like, they've got this free time if they're not working, and they come along and they're brilliant because they've been there and they're really great at like relating to the year 6s. So it's about a 45-minute workshop. We kind of introduce ourselves, we kind of have the year 13s or whatever there, they can ask them questions, they sort of share their kind of fears that they've had and how, you know, they didn't really have to be fearful. So there's a bit of kind of like upfront bit, and then what I introduced this year, which worked really well, was a bit more. Have you heard of prayer space in schools? So this is kind of based on their kind of stuff that they do. So it's more kind of like you set the room up, so then there's little activities that the year 6s can do as they go around. And if you've got a team, it's great to have one person on it. But like a simple thing would be like holding a jewel in your hand, and think about the things that you're looking forward to. You could say a prayer asking God to be with you as you do these new things. Think about where you could put the jewel to remind you that God is with you, maybe in your coat pocket or in your pencil case, and they get to take home a jewel. This is a good one that they really enjoyed, but particularly the boys. So making bunting, wow bunting, so they would write the things that they were proud of that they've done in primary school. So it's a mixture of kind of like trying to eke out the fears that they might have and identifying those, and also ending well as well. So there's different activities there, and then we would give them an It's Your Move book as well. So my team, bless them, decided that they would make bags that they could put all the bits in. So there's also like a little sheet there so that they take everything home with them, and then they can do it at home as well. Apparently these took a long time to make, so we were only able to give them to one school because I think we were in 7 schools. So then we had to go on to these bags, but yeah, just some ideas really. And we found the schools, since we changed it to this sort of style, absolutely loved it, and have now actually signed up for next year because they just said this was brilliant. And yeah, just hearing the comments from the children who really appreciated just having that time to be able to think about their fears, and they are fearful of so many things that you kind of think, actually if you just tell us and we can pray it through with you, we can talk, having the year 13s there saying, oh, you don't need to worry about like one girl was sharing saying she was worried because her brother was badly behaved, and she was worried that she was going to be labelled as the same, so she was worried about that. So just giving that opportunity for them to share. So that's the sort of the transition stuff. Now I just want to just quickly talk about the research project, because this is all very sort of practical. need to do a transition calendar, but what is going on in the heads of these year sixes? And I think that's what I wanted to explore. Why was Urban Saints, the kids absolutely loved it. What is the church not doing that it needs to do? Why are we losing these? And my passion is not on my watch. I feel like, okay, now that I know this, I don't want it to happen. It has to stop. So, you know, is there anything that we can be doing other than praying? You know, practically, what can churches do? So this was the title, is what can the contemporary church learn from Urban Saints in its ministry to teenagers? So I was looking at kind of like three things. So first of all, looking at the development changes and faith development of this particular age group. So I wasn't able to do research. This is what I would love to do, is to actually follow, like, you know, a child through its kind of like looking at its faith development at these various stages, to see is there anything changes in its faith development when they get to like year 5 and 6. So this was purely based on kind of like literature review. Then look at the Urban Saints model for how it ministered to teenagers, and look at whether it was effective in actually retaining children and young people. And then from that, look at recommendations and a model that could help children and youth leaders. So the research side, the methodology was like a literature review. I did a survey with Urban Saints leaders. I then picked out a few to do a focus group with. These were groups that had a high number of teenagers in their groups. And then I looked at Urban Saints in Guildford. So I did what's called an ethnography. So I went along 4 times on a Friday night. I first of all, because I'd heard this, you know, it's if I can't change me like Urban Saints, that's what was ringing in my ears. So I went along thinking, all right, you know, show me what's it going to be like then. And I was so like blown away, I'm not going to lie. And I had a 45-minute trek, and I did this in January, so it was cold. You can imagine, like, I did not want to leave home at all. Yeah. In fact, well, I was doing youth at the time as well, so I had my own youth group. That was like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be here. I'm actually driving over to Guildford. And I came away buzzing, and I was only going to do 3 weeks. And I actually tagged on a 4th because I loved it so much. And I came away and said, oh, sign me up. I'm quite enthusiastic, but then I always need a reality check. So I'd come away and like, actually, no, I can't keep driving over to Guildford. But I was really impressed with how they ran their groups. So this was the findings, really. So this is, so the first thing was they created this community like I've never seen. Obviously, it's not a church setting, but these, and you could see this obviously from even the way the lads were to me, like, why can't church be like Urban Saints? They lived, breathed Urban Saints. They had hoodies, they had the merch, but there was definitely this kind of like, they all felt like they belonged and identified with Urban Saints as a brand. There was an excitement in the room when the guys all arrived, and there was an element, so obviously it honed in on boys in particular, because it's the only Urban Saints group now that runs that's just boys only. So I don't know if you know the history, but it used to be a boys only group. It was formed around the same time as the Sunday school movement. Basically, guy walking in London saw a load of lads just messing about. Why aren't you in church? Church is boring. If I set up this group on a Friday, will you come along? Yes, we will. And it started from there. And then it kind of like went through an identity crisis around the same time as we started losing people children on a Sunday. And we're able to basically reinvent itself. So under new leadership, it changed from Crusade. It used to be called Crusaders to Urban Saints, and they allowed mixed groups, and then it just took off again. But Guildford Urban Saints is the more traditional group, so it hasn't allowed for girls to attend. And yeah, so it's changed its name, but it runs very like how it used to be. So you've got all these boys. It's very different to Scouts. When I say so, risk taking, for example, I couldn't believe what I saw. They basically made this room, probably about the size of this, into what was called a bundle room. It was basically like soft play for 15-year-olds. So they got like padded things. You can imagine, literally, they're all in there. All these. So it starts at year 4, I think, and then goes all the way up to 18. They're all. I mean, it was just. I was like, has anyone even thought about a risk assessment? And as a mum, you're just literally like, you know. But there was just kind of. It was just like a free for all. Different generational groups. So what was interesting was the guy that led it was probably 22, but there was adults that had been there from the, you know, back in the day that used to lead it, that were now sort of stepping back. So it was almost like once you were in, nobody ever left, but they raised up leaders from the group, and they then just sort of stepped back and kind of supported, which was really unusual. And they had like almost like leading from every age. There was sort of leaders, you could see this emerging leadership, but this kind of like, yeah, everybody believed in this and they were all going for it, and everybody was participating. Nobody was kind of on the sidelines. So that was the thing that I immediately observed from the group in Guildford, but also from the interviews that I'd done. The second was the leadership. They were saying they don't even bother with a rota because everybody just turns up. Which I was like, I know it's different on the Sunday setting, but this was how literally everybody wanted to be there, and they didn't need a rota, and they just recruited from within. So, you know, the lads just grew up, and as they grew up, they served and just had that mentality. And there was definitely this kind of like mentoring going on from the older ones that used to run the group, that were then mentoring like even the leader. It was just, yeah, incredible to see. They followed like this relational youth work model. So this was, and this is hard, this is what I really struggled with, to think, you know, you've got, as a children's worker, you know, you want boundaries, don't you? So I would say this was a sort of almost like a negative, in that they were really involved in these lads' lives. So, you know, if a lad couldn't get there, somebody would go and pick him up. You know, they drop everything and make sure that they would be there. You know, they just talking to them. I mean, they wanted to do it, but it was definitely like, you know, a relationship that they gave their all to. And it's kind of like, that's the balance, isn't it? Because you know, as youth and children's workers, we need boundaries, otherwise you just burn out. You get so involved that you then, you know, it's too much and you burn out. And we hear it, don't we, so often. So that is something that I don't know how that relates to a church setting, because you do have to have boundaries. But they certainly, you know, they were in there for the long haul with these lads. And then there was this miracle of the turn up. And this was just something that somebody had said on an interview, and it just really resonated with me. So I can't really explain it, other than it's where there's like this commitment. So there's no real agenda, and this is the freedom, I suppose, of maybe not having a church, it being in a church setting. They just sort of rock up. They've got a little bit of, you know, they know they're going to do something, but they're not so focused on, right, I've got to get this teaching across, because actually what is changing is just that relationship, that everybody just turning up and seeing what happens, and that's where the transformation happens. And you could see that in the boys, because even though it was raucous, even though they had this ridiculous bundle room, they'd have this time where then everybody would come together and it would just be quiet, and there would be respect for leaders, even though they'd been bundling on top of them, you know, 5 minutes ago. Suddenly it was like, right, this is the God time, and it would just be this mutual respect, and this invitation. And that's where the change was happening. I think you saw that these leaders were turning up for them, and they were then, and it was just, you know, incredible to sort of see, really, and witness. So can this model work in the local church? I think that was what was like, right, is this just, you know, something that can be on a Friday night, you know, because, you know, you have got a team that are committed. But if I would never, ever ask my Sunday team to be on every week. In fact, I would say to them, I don't want you to be on every week, once a month. And so it's that kind of like, okay, if you've got team that aren't there every week, how does that relationship build with with these tweens. So this is what I kind of pulled away from it, really. So I think the biggest thing is recognising the importance and distinct nature of tweenagers. So not being, really understanding, this is a unique group of people. And I think sometimes we kind of like, you look back to your own sort of childhood, and it's trying to like then relate to them, even like with the phones and the, like, I've got an 18-year-old and he's literally just attached to his phone the whole time. And it's like, why are you on, talk to me? But it's just what they do. And then you see others and they're all like this, aren't they? Literally just scrolling. And I guess it's just recognising that generation, but also recognising that this is a group that are, and puberty is hitting much earlier than it used to. So it's recognising what's going on in their bodies. And that, we do need to treat them differently to how we do, reception year 1. And if you are in a group where that are all in together, and I've been there on a Sunday morning where I've had reception in year 6, I did that for 3 years in Guildford. It's hard, even with trying to make them junior leaders and give them responsibility, it's just like praying, are they going to get anything out of this? Allowing for opportunities of the intermingling of age groups. I think this is a key thing, where possible, to try and get that kind of cross-pollination between all generations, actually. But this is what urban states do so well, is they have the different age groups, but they have this space where they all intermingle together. And it's encouraging that within, on a Sunday where you can. So like getting the youth to come over and maybe lead one of the groups so that they can see the leaders building that relationship when you're doing your socials with them, having the youth there as well. Leadership development and opportunities. I mean, you see this in schools, don't you? If you've ever been in a school and seen like the assembly, the year 6s are there, one's on tech, one's giving out stuff, they're on the back. The teachers get them involved, don't they? And that's the same in church as well, giving them opportunities. Because I think they do thrive. I've seen it before with like a board, year 5, and then as soon as they're on tech, they suddenly light up and they're doing stuff and they feel like they've got a part to play. Relationships above programme, I think that is where this whole miracle of the turn-up is. And sometimes, putting just your programme aside and thinking, actually, is it just a conversation that I need to have and build that friendship, or having that time where if they share something with you, then the following week checking up, how did it go, just investing, isn't it, in that kind of relationship, and encouraging that across in the church as well. And this is forging a culture of community. My heart at the moment is so for intergeneration, and I do think we're actually so the church that I work for now, which was one of the reasons why I struggled with whether to take the job or not, was because I knew it was a church where the children went out every Sunday. Every single Sunday they went out. The only time they ever stayed in was Easter and Christmas. Literally, they've never been in church, and I was like, this is against everything that I believe in. Can I really work in this church? And I really felt God say yes. I've been on this journey, and last week, so we've always run kids' work, even in the summer. We never gave any team, the children's team never had any time off, so they worked even in the summer. This summer was the first time I was able to say, right, I'm giving my team a break, so we're having all age, everyone's in. And I gave them the curriculum to use, and we did it, and it was great. A team of, have you heard of Worship for Everyone? Nick and Becky Drake. Yeah, right, forget this. Nick and Becky Drake do intergenerational worship fantastically. They do a conference in Birmingham. It's amazing. So the songs aren't like kiddie songs where you're going to get everyone doing My Lighthouse and hope that, they do Worship for Everyone, and they teach on that. If you go onto their website, they're brilliant. So I took the senior leaders to Worship for Everyone conference, just praying that they would catch the vision, and they did. And I can't believe I'm saying, but actually tomorrow is our first Sunday where the children are in, and going forward every week they're in for worship, and then we're coming out.
Great.
I'm literally like buzzing. It's a culture change, and it's painful, and you just got to keep going. But it's like they've caught the vision of it. They've seen the benefits of intergeneration. I think they, knowledge is passed around. It's not passed from the top to the bottom.
Yeah.
I'm halfway through the book and it's like
great.
you literally
Yeah.
can't put it down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah. So all this kind of works together, I think. But yeah, that's the kind of, creating this culture where everybody's learning together. You know, and I think there's so many different keys to kind of, I'm not saying if you put in a transition plan and if you do this, you're not going to lose any of your children. I think it actually starts from probably toddlers and works its way up. We're kind of coming at it at this end and probably need to start at the bottom and work up. But yeah, it's just cultivating a practice that fosters this miracle of the turn up, and that's what a Sunday morning is, isn't it? We're all just turning up and waiting on the miracle. Yeah. I want to finish with this quote from Phyllis Tickle. I don't know who she is, but I heard this, one of the staff team is doing a theology degree, and she read this out, and I was like, this just seems to tie up, I think, where we're at right now in you know, what God's doing. So about every 500 years, the empowered structures of institutionalised Christianity, whatever that may be at the time, become an intolerable hard shell that must be shattered in order that renewal and growth may occur. And I sort of feel like we're on this brink. So basically, Phyllis Tickle shows that every 500 years, something kind of happens, you know, and then we go back to like building our structures and conformity and all that, but then again it kind of has to kind of explode. And so I feel like that's where we're at the moment, and I feel like it's going to come from the children. I really do. And one of the things that I'm, you know, somebody had a word about the fact that, you know, when the children are in with the adults, that actually it's them that are bringing something. And just another thing on language as well. I don't know what your church calls the adult meeting. Ours used to call it the main service. So we're in. So kids are going out and adults are staying in the main service. Like what? What's that all about? And we've managed to change the language as well, so it's adults, children. That's pretty much it.
Really good.
With 10 minutes to spare.
Yeah. Jo, thank you so much. That was amazing. You've given us an awful lot to think